So my dentist's office has the most relaxing waiting room you've ever seen. You can sit on the most comfortable couch in all existence as this TV plays a slideshow of vacation destinations. The ceiling's painted a sky blue with wispy clouds, and you can almost imagine being out there on that warm beach and not at the dentist office about to get your teeth yanked out.
Dennis isn't that bad, but okay.
I like to try to guess where the videos were taken, which is a little difficult for someone who's only been outside the United States once, but this time I did know because I'd been there. It was a different angle than I remembered, but I'd driven past it one summer, my first time leaving the East Coast. So I thought I'd grown up on a mountain. Well, we called it a mountain, but it was nowhere as big as this monolith. Now, people talk about this need to touch grass, and I think it's usually meant as an insult, but every once in a while I get this need to touch snow. It usually comes out of nowhere, and then it hits all at once. I'll remember that snow exists, but that I live in a desert state, and building a sandman just doesn't have the same charm. And that's how I found myself on a flight to Jackson, Wyoming. Now, I've heard the view into the Jackson airport is stunning, this sweeping view of the Grand Tetons and the surrounding area. But something you don't really hear about flying non-rev is that you usually get the seats no one else wanted, if you get a seat at all. You'll still get there, but you have to sit in the middle seat of the exit row. You know, the one with nowhere to store your carry-on bags, so you have to put them up top. And you can't see very much through the little portholes. But that made the view so much more stunning when I did get outside. It's the first time I've gotten off a plane with a set of stairs instead of a jet bridge, and I got one good picture in before I got yelled at for standing in the middle of the tarmac. The Jackson airport is really small, and it looks more like a log cabin than it does an airport. I did really like this one anti-discrimination water fountain they had. You know that old photo with the two water fountains labeled colored and white? Well, this water fountain had something similar, except this time it specified the water fountains for everyone, with a quick reminder that discrimination is a federal offense, so that was cool. I wanted to explore it a little bit more, but I only had a few hours to get in my fill of snow, so I went straight to the rental car center to beat the rush. Normally I try to get a rental car while everyone's in the bathroom, but this time there were a bunch of elite members ahead of me, which makes sense in retrospect. If you're the kind of person who can afford visiting Jackson Hole during ski season, you can probably afford the elite benefits of any rental car group you want. All the rental cars are in a small lot outside, and I recognized it from the webcams. During the winter, weather conditions at this airport can change rapidly. Fog rolls into the valley out of nowhere, and the visibility can go from 6 miles to 1 in a matter of minutes. The parking lot webcams aren't officially approved sources for weather data, but they're still a good reference for real-time weather conditions near the runway. Another interesting find was the windshield ice scraper that came default with the rental car. It made sense, it's just something I wouldn't have thought about if I'd driven up here from Texas. Now, most of the pull-offs on the side roads were blocked off, and a lot of the signs were buried in snow, but they had plowed the main road to the park entrance, so it was impossible to get lost. Now, last time I was here, I was with someone who had a military ID, so I may have completely forgotten that there was a fee to enter the park, and it wasn't a cheap one. So I had two options. I could pay $35 for a one-time visit, or I could pay $70 for a year-long pass that worked at every national park in the country. And that's how I ended up with my America the Beautiful pass. Now, most of the park was buried in snow, and the road was only open for about 3 miles, but they'd done a really good job of keeping the road clear, and every mile or so, they had a plowed parking lot. I found a spot near the back, and I cannot possibly describe to you how happy I was to step out of the car and take a full breath of winter air. I always forget just how dry and dusty the air is in Texas, because when it's all you have for so long, it just becomes the standard. Then you go somewhere wet and cold, and it's like taking a weight off your lungs you completely forgot you were carrying. I built a little snowman with the stuff I found around the parking lot, and it came out a lot better than I expected. On the way back, I tried to take a shortcut, and I made it about 3 steps off the trail before my foot sank into the snow, and then it just kept going, until I was down to my waist in snow. Now, if this hadn't been a parking lot of a national park, I might have been in a bit of trouble, but as I did the splits in front of these very amused hikers, the only things really in danger were my pride, and maybe my pants splitting, or my shoe coming off as I rolled backwards to get my leg out of the snowbank. I still had about 2 hours left, but there was only one flight back to Dallas that day, and if I missed it, I was going to be in trouble. I had enough time to go by the local shops, and it's one of my favorite things to do on these little trips because the temp workers in these little tourist towns always have a really good story about how they found this job, or how they ended up out here, or about their first time away from home in a scary new place. The guy working this little snowed-in mini-mart was actually from Jacksonville, Florida.
Jacksonville, what up?
It was a neat little coincidence because that's where I lived before moving to Texas. And here we were, two guys who lived in Jacksonville, Florida, meeting up at this snowed-in gift shop in Wyoming. I was back in plenty of time to make it through security because life isn't one of those TV dramas. But I kept getting this error message when I tried to print off the ticket for the flight home. I tried to print out twice before I actually read the message. Flight leg canceled. Non-rev travel is an amazing benefit, but it doesn't mean you get to fly anywhere for free. You still have to pay taxes on the value of the ticket, and you only get to fly if there's a seat available, which means sometimes you don't know if you're going to make the flight until a few minutes before it leaves. So for non-revs, getting bumped from a flight isn't that uncommon, especially when traveling to a hub. But that day, DFW was flagged for a ground delay program, specifically for the winds. They were still within the operational limitations, but the winds were gusting strong enough that several inbound flights had missed the approach and were going around to try again. Now, one or two of these isn't a big deal, but there's a limit to the number of aircraft that can be in this airspace at the same time. And to keep from exceeding this number, inbound flights are held just outside the airspace until there's more room. This airspace in particular contains 2 airline hubs, both with a constant inbound flow. And you can imagine how this can become an issue fairly quickly when the rate of the inbound flights exceeds the rate that they are landing. Now, I can make a whole video about that alone, but there's a whole line of work dedicated to recognizing these disruptions, hopefully before they happen, and using the right countermeasures to control the inbound or the outbound flow. But I'm getting a little distracted. Thankfully, the FAA has a website with live updates about airports impacted by weather or construction or whatever. It's all available to the public, and it's the first place I look when my flight's been delayed, and I want to know why. According to the page, delays into DFW were expected until 9 p.m. that night, but I had to be at work the next morning, so I needed to get somewhere that had more options. Because when you're flying non-rev, the airline has no obligation to provide an alternative solution if there's a disruption. That's a privilege most paid ticket holders take for granted. They actually had to buy a ticket for a Delta flight to get out of there. It was the last seat they had, next to a broken seat, but it was still better than the alternative, because that airport kicks people out at night when it's closing time. And that's how I ended up at a beach in LA on my trip to touch snow. And that's the end, I guess. The rest of the story's pretty boring, but that's how life is sometimes. Shout out to these clowns who let a rando play quads for an hour, even though I moved like a drunk penguin. Hope y'all are doing alright out there, wherever you are.